everyone for coming in, and in particular the four, I think all of our board members are here that, and I appreciate their voice. Just as a reminder to the public, the board members are free to engage in discussion. If there's any voting to be done, it's just the three members from the committee, but you know, I welcome their voice and I welcome the people in the audience. So thank you all for coming. The first thing I'd like to do is call the meeting to order, noting that the board members are here. We have Tim and Randy joining us at the table here, and I appreciate that. I need an approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We do have some public comments this evening that I would like to recognize, and we also have several people who have written in, and again, I want to recognize those when they're always included in the minutes of this meeting. So this evening, I would like to start with Cass Plumble.
Oh, really?
No, you don't want to start? We don't have to start with you. Would you rather wait, Cass?
We need a microphone.
Yeah, I'd rather wait if somebody else
Sure,
wants
Mike,
to.
or it's just the microphone.
We can just have everybody kind of step to the middle there and speak. It'll pick up by the mic up there.
And Rebecca, I'm sorry, I didn't wave at you. You got me? Okay. So Greg, could you like to start, please?
Oh, sure. I'm not shy.
Could,
I got mine.
could somebody, Jack, would you do a time? 3 minutes?
That's pretty much exactly 3 minutes when I read it before.
I know. You're always so perfect, right? We can just get started.
That's the first time I've heard that, but thanks. Okay. My name is Greg Gens. I have 2 daughters in the district. I would like to encourage you to advocate to create a future DEI committee structure as it sits currently with 3 board members. I would humbly suggest that the charge would require fully open community engagement meetings focusing 1 month on all citizens occurring in the evening, and the next month focusing on student engagement to occur at the school directly after school hours, rotating every other month in that fashion. The BOE members in the beginning should take those engagement topics back to the full board and choose 1 or 2 topics to focus on, so the focus does not become overly broad, which previously occurred. Then the engagement sessions could be used to ID new topics as required to gauge how other topics are progressing or need to be addressed. I also see the engagement meetings serving to identify topics that need to be routed to administration, so administration can be proactive. A DEI committee should never become the complaint and accountability department for the school, as suggested at the annual meeting. Concerning the previous committee's recommendations, 1 or 2 of those recommendations could be routed to the appropriate existing committees, and many of the other recommendations can easily be identified as already being addressed in the school. I have a serious concern with creating a 15 or so member parent-student core DEI committee, which would be walking right back into the potentially singular ideology, partisan, activist, emotionally charged type committee that was previously engaged. I believe a parent-student committee would be much more easily swayed to partisan agendas, emotional reaction, again creating outrage as everyone else that has not been ordained with an unelected appointment would be disenfranchised from the committee's process. The blame for such a replay would be much more valid on those BOE members making those appointments if it were to happen again, because the outcome is foreseeable. It just previously occurred. Furthermore, on a hot topic like this, appointing students to a regularly videotaped public adult forum type committee is putting them in over their head. And it was a concern at the last BOE meeting as being potentially inappropriate. It would additionally exclude almost all other students who may like to give back and forth input, but unwilling to commit to such an intimidating public committee. Such a result would be the antithesis of the inclusion factor of DEI. I also believe that by only ordaining a select few unelected appointed parents and students to be members of the committee, you would be excluding many diverse thoughts, ideologies, and perspectives that would be much more likely to participate in an engagement meeting on their own terms, as opposed to regular meetings on the hot seat. Excluding the majority of citizens from unelected appointed DEI positions of influence only increases the tribalism and dissatisfaction, in my view, juxtaposed to allowing all citizens, other than those duly elected, to participate on an equal opportunity footing. Having a 3 BOE member DEI committee would provide equal electorate representation to all citizens because we all elected you. And how can anyone argue that would be unfair representation? I hope you will consider the above structure for the future DEI committee and discourage exclusive, unequal, unelected, appointed representation to the committee. Allow everyone equal inclusion by participation through engagement sessions Please don't validate the old saying of insanity is doing the same thing twice and expecting different outcomes. The responsibility of such an outcome would be squarely yours. Thank you for your attention and consideration.
Thank you, Greg. Laura Howe.
Thank you, everybody. I'd like to take a similar approach and use the word collaborative. I would really like to see the community come together instead of being separated. We're continually being separated by sides, whether it be in the newspaper or here. And I would like to see no separation, a collaborative effort, meaning the 3 board members that are elected for the DEI and volunteered basically could either, have community engagement meetings every other month, as previously stated, but could also maybe elect somebody, one parent, one person, each of those 3 people elect somebody, a representative from the community to be involved as well. Either way, there has to be some community involvement, some community engagement, not just informing the community of what happened, but involving the community so we have a say in the actual decisions. Because the DEI committee is not another guidance counselor. It's not another place for parents to come to and send their kids to when there are issues in the school. This is the task that was handed to our Board of Education and its current policies and procedures. 99% of what the DEI committee, ad hoc committee put forth are already in our policies and procedures. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. So I'd like us to spend our economics, our time, everything towards building a collaborative community and involving community thought. The other thing I really want to encourage the BOE is to really look at the partnerships. Look at the partnerships and research them before blatantly, just blanketly saying yes. The other thing I really want to implore is that the BOE helps empower our children, not just give them a safe space to go to, but give them the tools to be empowered to know what to say, to stand up to bullies, because that's what we're here to do, right? We're here to teach our children. So parents should be doing that in the homes. The Board of Education, it's not your job, but as part of the DEI committee, let's make that a focus of empowering our children as well. So collaboration, empowering our children, really looking at the groups that were,
30 seconds.
thank you, the groups that we're, partnering with and keeping our kids first and foremost. That's what we're here for, right? So again, let's work together instead of trying to split us apart. Thank you.
Thank you. Joel, Bruce, I don't know if that's a PH at the end.
Kurt, I'm gonna pass.
All right, thank you, Joel. Julie Larson. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for letting us speak tonight. I also support the idea of having the 3 school board members on the committee. We need the board to give a clear focus to the DEI committee if it continues. One area that seems to be coming up a lot is bullying and lack of respect for one another in our schools. We want our children to feel safe, welcome, and free to learn and grow here in Waunakee. Students should be able to express their political, social, and religious views without fear. We also want full transparency of the DEI committee's plans, future initiatives, and partnerships, as Laura was saying. We need the committee to be, we need the community to be invited for open discussion with the committee, to have our questions and concerns answered. I'm not in favor of adding other members to the committee, but if they are added, we want to know what the vetting process will be. We want the new members to represent diverse political and social views. Thank you.
Thank you. Gina Engel.
I'm actually gonna sit because the accommodation here disappeared.
Sure.
My name is Gina Pagel, and I teach here in the district and do not live here. I served on the committee over the last less than 18 months, which I mentioned because the charge was issued 12 to 18 months, and people keep talking about how it was a defined time. But we were well within the defined time. I first of all just wanted to thank students for speaking up, especially those who participated in the engagement session, as well as those who served on the committee. Before I continue, I also want to thank the committee members. We met 19 times during the pandemic, many of us while we were teaching and figuring out day by day everything that we were dealing with. Parents who were facing the same things in their homes and in our community. I really felt that this committee was starting to catch our stride. It is absolutely true that in the beginning, the charge that we were given was so unspecified that it took quite a bit of time for us to figure out the direction that we ended up taking. But this statement was issued by the board in September of last year. The Waunakee Community School District values community. We, as the directors of the Board of Education, appreciate the uniqueness of everyone throughout our school system and within the village. We celebrate diversity and welcome the differences that each person contributes to our learning community. In the WCSD, we will not allow language, actions, or symbolism that are demeaning, malicious, racist, or sexist to be directed towards people of any race, religious belief, or non-belief, gender, age, sexual orientation, or ability. We wholeheartedly and cooperatively provide our support and encouragement to the charge of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Ad Hoc Committee. We advocate for the use of anti-bias strategies that allow electors or educators to create an inclusive and identity-safe learning environment. We stand behind educators who are leading courageous
30 seconds,
conversations
please.
in their classrooms and in the community. And I would just urge the board to revisit that statement and to ensure that whatever you decide, that you truly consider how to incorporate voices that have frankly been unheard for far too long in this district. I've taught here for 15 years, and I was proud to serve on a committee that was made up of people who care deeply about our kids and our community.
Thank you, Jean. Robert McPherson.
Good evening. I'm starting to feel like a broken record at this point. Robert McPherson, I'm here obviously in favor of forming DEI into a standing committee. I've heard some comments that I think it kind of shows that it's not really understood how committees work in municipal government in the state of Wisconsin. Since I supported at the beginning, I'll just restate what I stated back then. I believe that it's important that we have people from the community and students that are able to come to the Board of Education, sit on a committee, just like it would be in any other municipal government that includes its citizenry inside of a committee. They make recommendations. We know that the Board of Education is under no obligation to act on a recommendation from a committee. I think that's important to point out, and that's why it's important to have citizen input. This isn't unelected individuals in the community making decisions for the Board of Education. The Board of Education still retains that right. They have not abrogated that to the citizens. The second part that I would bring up is that, as I've stated before numerous times, and I know you guys must think I'm insulting you at this point on the Board of Education, but there is a lack of diversity on the Board of Education. And I hear people say it's, well, we elected you. Well, it's hard to get people of color. It's hard to get religious minorities. It's hard to get people with disabilities to run for, the Board of Education or any municipal government because they don't want to go out in the community and potentially have their reputation trashed or deal with the stress of an election. Some of you, some people in Board of Education ran uncontested, and that makes it easier. Some of you had elections, and it's a little bit more difficult. So I think it's important to realize that as we talk about this type of a committee, that you're going to get voices from the community that otherwise wouldn't talk. I heard a comment earlier about how high school students might be intimidated to do that. Well, we had high school students on a housing study for the village, and high school students can't afford housing or they can't even rent, but they were still able to come and give their opinion about what it would look like for them post-graduation living in the village. They weren't intimidated. And I think that if you cast a net, like was discussed in previous meetings, and reaching out to the different student organizations, you will find students that are willing to come represent. I think that's a great idea to have them come and be representatives into the committee. I would also point out that please don't forget, and maybe this is how you get some more parent inclusion, but please don't forget there are still kids at the elementary and the intermediate and middle level. There's a lot of talk, it seems, focused on the high school level, but as we know that these are issues that can be ingrained in kids at a very young age, and so there still needs to be some consideration for how that you can still account for that with this. So I would urge that at least make sure there is some coverage in that area. And finally, for anybody who's worried about transparency, everything is recorded. Everything is open. There are no discussions outside of meetings. You can open records request. Randy knows that I've done that quite a few times to the school district. So I would just say, from a general public comment statement, I don't think that you guys should worry about transparency as long as you're following Wisconsin state law that you have to follow. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Melissa McNeil.
Hi, I'm Melissa Elmangor. I have a son in the school district. The first thing I want to talk about, which is actually off topic, but the school has a mask mandate, so I would like it if everybody at the meetings would always be wearing a mask. We ask teachers to be teaching all day with a mask on. I think that when people come up here to talk for 3 minutes, they can certainly keep the mask on too. Next, I want to ask, when looking at the plans for this, the DEI, the standing DEI committee, I ask, what is the point of the committee? Because if the point of the committee is to address student issues, students must be on the committee, because if not, I don't expect the Board of Education to know what's going on in schools every day. It's been a long time since I was in school, and I'm guessing it's been an even longer time since you guys have been in school. So what the issues are that our children are facing today, they're not the same as when I was in school 25 years ago. The students have made it clear in the various testimonies that we've heard, including the one that was at the high school, that there's many issues in the school, even issues such as just basic safety. They don't even feel safe in their own environment to learn. I mean, if you don't feel safe in your environment to learn, how are we really expecting the kids to learn what they need to before they're graduating? This isn't even addressing the point of just basic inclusion and acceptance and feeling safe in their community. Somebody commented about we elect the board members. Yes, us parents, we elect the board members. Those 18 and above elect the board members. Our students, unless they're a senior in high school, they're not electing the board members. So no, they're not getting a say in who's on the Board of Education. And so by having a committee that is only made up by 3 members of the Board of Education, it's not addressing what our students are asking for. Further, I just want to point out the lack of diversity on our Board of Education. If we don't have diversity on our Board of Education and the committee is going to be made up of only members of the Board of Education, how are we actually forming an inclusive committee that can actually address the issues that we know minorities feel every day? But I don't experience them. And I'm sure you guys don't experience them either. If the board is only made up of Board of Education members,
seconds.
how are we going to know what are the actual issues that students are facing and are needing addressed? I want to just give an example of the lack of understanding in terms of realizing that other people have needs outside of your own, and how there's just a lack of diversity even on the Board of Education. Not having a place for somebody to sit and somebody having to go over here, unlike the rest of
3
us,
minutes.
that is a prime example of not understanding somebody with a disability can't stand up here. So this is just a prime example of how it is so important to have people of diverse that are diverse to be able to be on the Board of the Board of Education Committee for this or for the DEI committee.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.
Dina Cartwright.
Hi, I'm Dina Courtwright. I have lived in Waunakee my entire life, so 50 years. I believe that change has to come with inclusion of all people, all different groups, all different ages, all different mentalities. And I think that we cannot make change happen unless we include everyone. And so I love the idea of the board having its own committee, but then including high schoolers who are interested in participating and going to a group session. Although I think it should be during the school day, otherwise kids won't be able to participate after school if they're in other activities. And if it's in the middle of the school day, it'll encourage more participation. But I think there's a lot of kids who'd like to talk, and we just want to include everyone if we are going to try to get them to create change. I know my son is a very big change agent, and we want him to love all people for who they are, and he does that. He's very inclusive, and he would be a good person who could be a change agent. He's kind of a Ferris Bueller of people, and someone like him could be a really good person who would try to get other people to understand why change needs to happen. And I also think that parents need to be involved, and they need to have a say as well. And so having the speaking sessions for the community, I think would be great. And I think that's the only fair way to do it, is to include people who are engaged. And that's why Waunakee has always been an awesome school district. Our parents are super engaged, the kids are super engaged, the teachers are amazing and are super engaged. And in order to affect change at that level, we've got to include everyone. So,
Thank you. Thank you.
thank you.
Pass.
You guys have the desk, but we don't today, so I'm gonna try to keep it succinct. Thank you that you guys are actually going ahead with the committee. I appreciate that greatly. But I also wish you would still have other folks on the committee for a lot of reasons, like the people that were previously part of the committee. And there's a lot of reasons to that. Part of it being with the 3-member small committee like this, you guys are not as in touch with everybody in the community that is involved with DEI and the work around DEI. Some of you know, or maybe don't. I happen to be one of the people that runs a diversity page, which has been very collaborative. This time a year ago, we were continuing to do weekly community Zooms where we had village leaders participating and engaging with the public, and they freely asked and answered questions. It was fantastic at the very height of everything that was going on with civil unrest in Kenosha. With that whole situation, we had the chief of police doing a Zoom voluntarily, answering questions and explaining things that are happening in our community and opening himself up to various community members, very transparent. So these things are possible. If I was thinking about diversity page, for example, that's full of people with diverse ideology, because the idea of DEI, and I would throw in accessibility, that was something that was raised amongst those of us that have been interested in this work for a long time. I would throw that in there too. Because it's not political, it shouldn't be political, that shouldn't matter. These are human rights. These are not political, left, right, center, whatever, it's human rights. The kid thing, I absolutely agree, let's have kids, but I want a second, and I brought this up before, our younger kids, there are things happening in those grade levels that their parents need to be involved. So there needs to be representation of children in those smaller grades. Not only that, but we're talking about the kids, which is fantastic, and that should be all of our focus, hopefully. But, and I'm glad Ms. Pagel spoke as a staff member, you'd be shocked in the last year and a half how many different people that are actually on staff here have reached out and shared things with people like me and others that were actually on the committee about things that they are uncomfortable with, and they aren't exactly sure where to go and how to deal with that. So even your own staff
30 seconds.
is having issues with that. There's so many more things that I could share with you. Nobody else seemed to be interested in DEI, I will say. You didn't hear from a lot of us. You didn't see all of us at these meetings and writing you guys emails for the last year and a half because we believed in you guys. We believed you guys were working on this. There was a committee established. We believed the work was happening. So we didn't feel the need to email and record request, all of those things, and show up and make these big speeches at these meetings because we trusted you guys were doing the work. Until the summer, when people that, for whatever reason, decided there was something nefarious going on. We trusted you guys. And I think we can trust you guys again. And I think that we can have a collaborative environment. And I think it's going to need people in the community that will also help further this work in a productive and collaborative way. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Meredith.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Not phonetic.
Hi, my name is Meredith Glick and I live in Waunakee. I have a child at Heritage Elementary and another at the intermediate school. I'm here again to support the efforts of the ad hoc DEI committee that convened in the spring, conducted an audit, and made recommendations presented here on ways that the Waunakee School District can make improvements around issues relating to diversity, inclusion, and equity. Firstly, given the criticisms that people have made about the committee around diversity of thought and more recently groupthink, I feel it's necessary to remind everyone that joining the committee was open to everyone in the community through an application process, and opportunities to join were presented in multiple places and publications throughout the village. I myself remember seeing and considering joining, but did not feel I could make the time commitment. In addition, we've heard at recent board meetings that the recommendations that resulted from the committee's meetings were in fact discussions. It's not a process from one perspective. Members of the DEI committee themselves have stated here anecdotally that there was discussion and debate. According to Psychology Today, groupthink is a phenomenon that occurs when a group of well-intentioned people makes irrational or non-optimal decisions spurred by the urge to conform or the belief that dissent is impossible. The problematic or premature consensus that is characteristic of groupthink may be fueled by a particular agenda, or it may be due to group members valuing harmony and coherence above critical thought. Sorry. Rather, what seemed to unite the people who became members of the DEI committee was critical thought and the belief that the Waunakee School District has an opportunity to improve and do better. I continue to believe this village and the school district has many opportunities to learn and grow. Evidence of groupthink seems to better apply to people believing racism and classism, among many, do not exist in Waunakee and beyond, and might not have ever existed. Groupthink, as defined above, amounts to shutting down discussions of barriers, and wanting to silence discussion. The definition is in line with people arguing that a DEI committee does not even need to exist in Waunakee. I really believe it's time to act
30
and
seconds.
not to reinvent the wheel. I mean, this is a committee to create another committee from a committee that was already going and made recommendations. So I think we need to look back to them for moving forward.
Thank you, Meredith. That is all the slips I got. Any more? Okay, thank you. I would like to thank everybody for their comments, and in particular the DEI, our ad hoc committee members who have come this evening. I appreciate all of the comments, and I guess what I immediately feel is I think we're all here for the same thing. I think we all want our kids to feel included and to have that safe environment and to have a voice. So I do appreciate, the comments, and I especially appreciate some of the suggestions as we kind of embark on kind of creating what's going on here. And as our last speaker said, I don't want to go back and recreate everything. I mean, we have some great work that committee has handed off to us. And I feel that audit that they completed is an excellent place to begin some of the discussion that we're going to have this evening, as well as, I think we have, in general, we need to kind of look at what it is we feel we can accomplish, kind of a mission, and then who to put around the table. So, I don't know, Randy, if you want to make any comments before we begin discussing.
Well, I think you covered most of it. I think it's just a piece of acknowledging that we do have some recommendations that were presented to the board. I think that's part of our mission, but it's something that we need to determine how we're going to address that. And certainly the pieces that you've heard with regards to the committee, how we deal with experiences that people have and the voice of parents, community, students. And then also looking at, and I think that fits into some of the mission of the board, is also looking at how do we do broader engagement as well. And that was a piece I spoke about at kind of our forum at the end of September as a desire for us to do. So I think as part of this, or auxiliary to this, it needs to be part of our discussion as well. So I think those are kind of at least the 4 pieces I think that we need to discuss as we move forward.
So as we begin, is there a place around the table? Should we look at some of the recommendations of that audit, or should we look at around the table? I feel we should select that vision, or that, what it is we want to begin our work at, and then kind of look at the voice we need to. Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things that we have to do is create conversation, in the community. And I think what we've got to do, I've seen a lot of negative communications on this topic, and those negative comments don't really move this thing forward. So I think one of the things we have to do is really be respectful, of people that are trying to do this work. But I think it's been brought up several times, that one, trust, and in providing trust, it's providing voice. And I think there's a number of different ideas and views, and just because some people might have different views, doesn't make them bad people. And what I would propose is, as a board, try to provide direction, because I think that's what we're looking for, is direction on the mission of this. And I've proposed it in the past, is let's start out with these listening sessions, so that we can capture, the information. And, when you look at these listening sessions, they should include parents. And it should be, everybody that has an interest regarding this, should come, be invited, and be able to speak at the listening sessions. I think, another group that we need to kind of talk to is the teachers. Again, we pull the teachers together and provide them with an opportunity so that we can capture that information. I think the third group, should be should be the administration, where we pull the administration together. And when it comes to students, I think, what we should do is break the students down into subgroups, because, obviously, what we want to do is protect them, from potentially any backlash. I don't know if we're going to get it, but, I think they'd be more open, in their subgroups to talk with us. And when it comes to students, I think we need to go to, their environment, which might be, a club meeting or, we've got, several different, subgroups, where we can kind of sit down and talk with them in their safe space, I guess is what we would call it, or their area where they feel comfortable. What we do is we use the same questions for each one of these groups, and then we start looking at trends. Because everybody's going to come with a slightly different perspective. We're going to get it from the students, what they're seeing on the inside. We're going to get it from the parents, what they're seeing their kids are bringing home. We're going to get it from teachers and administration too.
So Jack, are you looking at do we decide the focus first and then ask questions based on a focus? So what I'm hearing is you're thinking that our focus is student experiences, some of the voices we heard at the engagement on the 27th. So the kind of primarily the safety of our students and the inclusion of our students. And is that where you're kind of focusing your attention right now?
Well, I think what we have to understand is their experience, and in each one of these groups.
Right.
What's the experience? Barriers, what are they seeing as barriers? What are they seeing as opportunities? So I think, and get down to the issues that are important to each one of these groups, because it may be different between each one of these groups. How do we bring it together? But we should be able to identify trends. And I think if we let everybody speak, we're going to be able to kind of bring together, this is what we need to focus on this year. Because, we talked about, the symbolism and all that kind of stuff. We've got programs in the works with our branding program, so that's going to be done by end of the school year. So all of that will be, so I think some of these issues, we're already taking care of them. With referendums, we're going to be taking care of buildings. So I think when you look at this, change is difficult. And it's changing the culture doesn't change overnight. It is a process, and it's a long-term process. But I think understanding, where these different groups are coming from is going to help us establish the process, bring the people in that we need to identify and talk to.
I think Jack Alderson had some ideas. Part of my thought was much the same, that we have the committee conduct the engagement groups that we heard tonight separately from each other. I want to be careful that we don't redo what's already been done. And so one example to me would be, we know there's a definitive problem with kids feeling there's a place to go to report mistreatment that they're experiencing. I know something's coming eventually, but at this point, they don't know what's in place. And so that's something we can start mailing right now with, okay, if this is what happens, this is where you go. And these are different, and we have the resources identified. I don't know if it's counselors that we start with, or if it's administration, but I know that's a definitive problem that's come up. So that one, I don't think the committee should even have to deal with. We just say as a board, this is what needs to be done, and now this is the work for the committee work.
Do we have an update on that reporting tool?
So at the last curriculum committee meeting, the request was to bring that into not the one Thursday, but the one on November 18th. And I think the concept is it'd be good to have a full board endorsement of the tool before we bring it in. But you know, I met with 712 administration on it in terms of kind of once it's up, how we would implement with it. And we're gonna have a similar meeting with K6 next week.
I guess that's why I recommended the update, you know, the clarifying for our students, where can you go? Who do you go to? And if you're being harassed because you went to somebody, who do you go to? And you need it advertised and communicated. So that can be a piece we do. Tim, I think you mentioned that the structural part probably wouldn't be available till second semester.
I mean, I think it's really a matter of making sure we've got buy-in on it. I mean, there were some very small tweaks just in terms of clarifying timelines that 712 admin had, you know, when we met on it. There may be something very minor that would come from case. I mean, the thing's ready to go. But I think the thought was that it would benefit from actually having board eyes on it and having kind of that unified backing before we implemented it.
Okay.
So Tim, we've got PBIS. I think that's been around for 3-4 years, if not 5. How do we use that tool to pull out data, you know, on some of the issues, behavioral issues that I think we're talking about, you know, kind of data.
Right, so PBIS, you know, has a few different important components to it. One is just how we teach students behaviors. And I think, you know, one thing, you know, I feel, you know, is certainly very clear from the information we get from students, information we get from, you know, climate surveys, pieces like that, is we need to look at how we're teaching behaviors and interactions with students and devote more attention to these types of negative interactions and make sure that we have those handled better, both at the staff level and at the peer level. But then with PBIS, we have teams in each school that look at behaviors. Are there patterns in the data? You know, what types of behaviors are we seeing? When do they happen? Where do they happen? And I think, you know, one thing we, you know, and our teams do a good job of breaking it down that way. I think anything that would come up to a reporting tool like this would just kind of flow into that process. But I mean, I think the reporting tool is an important thing for us to add. I also think, you know, to me, our most pressing concern is the student climate issue, is listening to students in particular for other suggestions. And as several of, you know, our speakers tonight have noted, we have some things that probably developed in the younger grades. And that's probably where we also need to listen very carefully, you know, to what staff are telling us and what families are telling us too, because we probably aren't going to have a lot of great direct feedback, maybe from 3rd or 4th graders, but we can from the adults that are in their lives.
The other thing that we got to be careful with, you know, we've gone to these listening sessions where we're, you know, the educator listening sessions where, you know, we're just kind of putting on more programs and so forth. I think when we're talking behavioral and, you know, this other reporting tool, you know, are there other things that that we're doing? You know, and I don't have the answer to that, but how can we streamline that so that everybody knows that this is where we need to go? You know, as opposed to maybe there's 2 or 3 other pieces that have been around in the past that they've gone to. You know, how do we streamline that so that we're capturing that information?
Well, when I finished reviewing the audit, it seems to me, and I may be wrong, but you take the 7 focus points, it's really 3 categories. The structural, the student safety, and it's community communications and engagement. And so those will be the 3 areas for the committee to focus on. I think we find out what we are doing or not doing a little bit from the administrative group during those listening sessions or engagements. We can get some of that from the students and parents from their anecdotal experiences, how we failed them in some areas and where we responded well to some of the areas. So I think the engagement sessions would be an excellent place to focus on those things. I'd like it to be more of a dialogue than speaking in a microphone and that sort of thing. So I think it'd be more productive as an actual discussion. And, you know, Jack, your idea about using the school for our students to create a greater safety area, I think that makes sense. So
where do we do the community? Is this room going to be sufficient?
I'm sorry.
With the room here,
I would go to the PAC or.
but the PAC, I mean, we need to
Well, we
kind
got
of.
the
Cafeteria.
dude in the commons.
Commons.
Or the large group room in Heritage.
Yeah.
The commons might be nicer because you got the tables and everything set up there, you know.
Can I ask a clarifying question to what you said?
Sure.
I think it fits into what Jack was saying. And part of what I heard you saying, Mark, was following along with what Jack was talking about with, I think you titled it a listening session, and both of you did. It's really kind of a
Engagement
an
session,
engagement process where there can, a place where there can be dialogue. Is part of me, because part of the dialogue that you're envisioning around just being able to get additional input on some of the topics that were developed through the initial DEI ad hoc audit and trying to get some additional, flush some of those pieces out so that you can put priority to some of them. Is that kind of what you vision?
Yeah, so so the committee can prioritize then what we think we could do year 1. What maybe is something that's going to take us 2 years to get to, or maybe even 3 years. But once the committee has a sense of those 3 topics, either to support or maybe give a different perspective on the 7 focus points, I think they have a report and recommendations to the board what needs to be done as a whole.
I guess I'd like to clarify too, before we go and do you know, what are the requirements to be on this committee? I think we've got to go through this process, you know, first, so that we understand what the direction is. And I like that direction. You know, we got those topics, you know, let's gather that information. Once we gather that information and we understand where we're going, what direction that we can give this committee, then we can say, do we need, you know, 10 parents or 6 students or whatever. But I think this is the groundwork that needs to be done before we can go through that process.
Mark, can you give me the 3 things that you?
Yeah, the structural or systematic. And then a review of our structural and systematic operations.
that like policy type stuff, Mark? Is that what-
It'd be policies, I think it'd be helpful for a board to know what is in place. I mean, right now, I know what I would do if I was a teacher. But I've heard from a number of staff who have expressed uncertainty or unwillingness. And
To respond in
to
their
respond to
response.
incidents that are happening, and I don't know if that's lack of knowledge of what's available. But that's a reteaching thing. I think that has to happen every year for staff and students. This is what we're trying to do to maintain, and these are your options, that kind of thing. And so we may have it in place, but what do they see as working in their system and what's not working?
That was your first.
And then the second one was student safety and sense of belonging. And then the third one was community communications and engagement opportunities. And there are really, you can come up with a better word than I did. My brain's muddled right now, but I think I'm looking at how do we communicate with the families that need the access, that have no idea what step one is, or they're frightened to death because it's going to an authority and they fear whatever consequences that can come about. What can we do? What are we doing and what can we do better?
So Jack, I like what you said, that we prepare in advance questions. So we have, as we meet with these varied groups, we can collect data.
We need to be more specific with the charge, or is that's too broad?
I think we need to be very specific.
So there's two things I heard. I heard one, and I think it goes back to what you were talking about, Jeff. One was really needing to reach out to, I think you identified community, parents, teachers, administration, and then also kind of going to students. So as you kind of.
And Randy, I think going to students would be going to, you know, the different groups,
Right.
as opposed to bringing them all together.
Yep, yep. And I guess what I'm just trying to get a sense of is, would you see this as a series of different engagement opportunities? I mean, obviously the student one is probably separate, because I think that what you're looking at to reach them is probably going during their day when they're actually meeting.
I would see that, I would see community as one. Administration would be another one. And the teachers being a third, because I think what you're trying to do is you're trying to get the different perspectives on where they're coming with this trend.
I envision it as a one-time information gathering to get a base of where the community needs to go. And then afterwards, once those meetings have been held, we could agree to have additional engagements once a month or every other month for those who we've already met with, or anyone who would wants to come and share their experiences and opinions.
Joe? Can I make a comment?
Sure, absolutely.
I think we're doing this backwards. We have talked about inclusion, openness, everything like that. But what we're doing right now is creating a funnel on this whole process. We're taking what a committee took over a year to develop and saying, now we're going to have 3 board members guide and go in and take input from the community in listening sessions again. And then turn around and maybe set up an open committee with students and whatever, and hand them their class assignment. And say, this is what you should work on for diversity and inclusion. Rather than saying, let's put a committee together that includes a bunch of people. We talk about wanting these open discussions back, not just a microphone listening session. We've had that for a year. And we need to continue that. And to continue that, you create people in a larger group that are working together, not just every month we'll let you come in and do public comments again. I think we're doing it backwards. You're not going to get a lot of engagement in a committee where you're handing them a homework assignment, which is what this process is sort of setting up. If you want people to fully engage in something like this that is so difficult to volunteer for, you have to let them be part of the process of developing what the committee does. They come there because they see a need and they see something they want to try and work with. They don't come because you're giving them an assignment to work on. And this process is setting it up that way. I think we need to reverse the process and do it more of saying, here's the recommendations that this group came up with. If you would like to participate in helping refine, develop, and create the culture in the school, we're not creating a reporting tool. We're not dealing with individual specifics of what happens to students in the classroom every day. We're creating a culture for the school. People who want to do that hard type of work of doing that macro work, not the micro work. Doing that macro work, they have to be part of developing the macro. If we don't let those people be in on that, you're going to have a hard time getting volunteers and keeping them committed. I think listening sessions are great and should always be done. And you know what? Every single committee that Joel chaired had public comment, had the ability of people to come in and do the listening session. But to get the people to commit to sit in those chairs and work that hard month after month after month, I don't think handing them an assignment is the way to get them there. I think you do it by letting them be part of the process, taking what was developed before and helping decide what needs to be done, what can be worked on in the schools. Those students who are going to come, the ones we already heard from, they know where they want to go. They know what they want to work on. I think we need to let them do it that way and set up the committee and let them be part of the setting up the listening sessions. Let them be part of helping run that process, not us running it and then handing it to them.
Dave, I don't see this as an assignment. You know, I think what we need to do is understand how to put the form together. You know, and I think that's the challenge. You know, when you sit down, you really have to understand what the problem is, and I think that's what we're trying to do is define the problem. And we're getting, you know, as a board, we're getting that information, you know, from these groups that we've defined, because they are seeing it from, you know, different lenses. So I don't necessarily, I would take issue that we're giving these people assignments.
Dave, I get what you're saying, but I also understand, I mean, I think we're using the recommendations that came out of that audit and trying to get a wider voice of the community to clarify from this document what we should work on. That's what I'm hearing is.
And actually, I don't know a committee that would have, that has had this amount of engagement that we've formed. You know, it's multiple of engagement opportunities for dialogue and clarification. And then we're going to continue, they would continue that on a monthly basis for participating in some way.
So do you see long-term, if we do the community engagement, do you see long-term that the core committee increases? It's more than. you never see the core committee increasing.
I think if you did, it'd be very limited. Maybe 4 additional members. Focus is on the school board doing something. And I think the school board needs to do something then to show our leadership and our commitment to this. Expanding it to a committee framework like it was. One thing it's going to do is going to create dissent in the community. They'll see it, some of the community members will see it as just what was done, and what was done was good stuff, but they don't agree with it. So if we're going to try to unite the community, I think it's much better to do it as a committee structure. And then as the committee sees a need to expand to some additional voices, they could have that option.
We start with the community engagement, and then from that voice, we determine whether we need an additional membership at the table. Any other comments from the board?
Well,
Judy.
I think I just interpreted Mark's differently than yours. You're saying that you take these 3 board members and you add a few voices to it, and then you start working on issues. And when you need more community involvement, you ask for it. Is that right?
I think so. If you said, start with the board as a committee members, as they see the need, add different voices.
Not add, but ask for different voices. I think the committee should be a set group and not keep adding people to it.
Well, by asking them, saying, or creating, it's just a matter of, they provide a number of seats. And for that, they can help, if they want to take application for a spot, I think the board can appoint. We've had tremendous help from the community in the past by appointed committees members. So I think the committee can wrestle with that piece, I guess. I don't.
But I think the other thing too is that depending upon the problem or the situation that you're trying to solve, it may take different people, to help us out. This isn't just a singular, this group of people are experts in this area. I would submit that, we would also, bring professionals in, to sit down and, if we've got questions on different topics, we can charge administration, Tim Scheller, to bring in the right people, to provide, guidance, around this. So I think, there's a number of things that we could, we can do, because we're changing the culture. That's what we're trying to do. It's a culture change, right? And it's going to be messy.
Now, to your point, the committee's purpose isn't just to re-echo, that would be a terrible waste of time, the needs that are there, but if there are needs, additional needs or different needs, we need to be aware of them. The committee has to be able to come up with a recommendation for, as examples, the reporting process, the anonymity piece, I think, is important on one level. But what are other districts doing internally? Do they have staff? How do they train them, or how many do they have? Where have they found it most effective? Those kind of things would be helpful for the community to hear. And so that would be, I think, part of the chain. I don't know that that's got to go in the charter. But if you're gonna analyze those things, it would be helpful to get feedback from other schools that are dealing with the same issues.
I think to your point, if we charge administration, this is the information that we want as, by the January meeting, whatever. They're gonna go out and do a good job and put that information in. So that, decisions can be made. One of the things that we talked about is budget, right? And, we asked for, 3-year plan so that if these things require some budget, we may not be, budgets are tight this year. We may not be able to move it forward with maybe some of these programs, but if we start planning for them,
Yeah, a 3-year plan.
that we can start putting some money aside so that, it may take 2 or 3 years. And quite frankly, you're not going to change a culture in a year.
Well, one question I just want to put out there is when you look at the audit reports, you look at the different pieces that were in there from the ad hoc committee and the work that they did in there. There's a lot of different pieces of recommendations, and I think, Mark, you tried to categorize them into a few different areas. I mean, I just want to kind of see where we're at with this, with regard to what I'm hearing thus far is that this is bringing value in the respect of kind of identifying issues of which you'd like to flush out better with more dialogue. I think that's what I'm hearing thus far. When you look at what we have already as far as being able to forward the work, and it may be a piece that you want to go through that process in order to clarify it and refine it and put your priorities to it. Many of these fall in the areas of our human resources, curriculum committees, policy committee, and budget. I mean, those are really the 4 that they kind of fall in generally when you look at all the recommendations that fall there. Because the general thought about what you're proposing here tonight is that this audit report is kind of the base of which you're trying to gather more input on some of these points, so that then you can do a better job and feel like you can prioritize them to know where they, how you're going to move them forward and into which committees to put them. I mean, some of them fall naturally into one place or another. Some of the things curriculum wise obviously fall there. Some of the things with recruitment, retention of staff obviously fall under HR. So I guess I'm just trying to look at kind of what are some of the, if we're trying to get, I think if we're going to look at some of those things, in my mind, there's probably a piece of kind of in the middle there that has some areas that you may want to flush out, but there's also some that you may want to move forward to other areas that may be responsible for further vetting those pieces forward.
And to your point, Randy, I don't think this committee should be duplicating what the charge of the other committees are. So, if they're curriculum, we should put them in curriculum. If it's budget, put it in budget. If it's facilities, put it in facilities. A lot of these things we've been talking about.
Right.
ADA with our buildings.
Right.
Those are budgeted items, and we can't do it.
Right.
Come on. It needs to be put into the cycle when we have the funding, to do it.
Yeah, and that's a good one, Jack. I mean, I think when you start to look at those, I'm not sure. I think the vetting process with those is we're already into things like if you're looking at ADA compliance, that's a pretty simple one to talk about. We have facilities planning going on right now. That's the place where we put that on the forefront of some of that work. Because I think some of the, at least the way I've seen some of the audit report is that these are looked as items that they've identified as areas of concern that now need to be vetted out to be kind of prioritized. But the prioritization then moves into kind of what's actionable and what's not actionable at this point. And there's some of them that I think we have some structures that can move them forward now as opposed to waiting. And I think that's a good example of one. There's a couple others, but I think that's a piece that, as far as kind of the structure of wanting more input, there's also some of these I think that can move forward. As far as at least moving them not move forward necessarily saying here's the answer, but it brings that there is a structure in place that could already address it.
You know, kind of build on that, Mandy. I mean, I think one area that probably doesn't neatly fit into our existing committees though is that student experience piece and the climate and the sense of belonging or not sense of belongings. And, you know, regardless of where the composition of the committee discussion lands tonight, I think it's important, I think, you know, to make sure we have some ideas around engaging with the students. So I mean, as a board, you engage, you have community engagement meetings, and yes, students can come to those, but they are in the evening. And I think the idea of connecting with students in existing groups they have at the high school and doing it during the school day to remove barriers to participation, I think that's really important. And then I think the question is that a board committee like your current listening sessions? Do you want additional parents or community members or staff members to join you as part of that? But I mean, I think, you know, we're still sitting here as adults, understanding maybe part of the elephant, trying to understand the whole problem. And I think unless we really engage our kids even more broadly than we have already, we're not really going to have a full picture of the climate pieces. And, you know, we may have some solutions in mind now, but they're only going to be parts of the solution until we connect with kids more.
I think we have to go to the students. I think. And when we meet with the students, I think, you know, we should have the advisor there. You know, the club, if we choose to go to the club, I think the club advisor should be there, you know, because I feel more comfortable, you know, with that. So, and that could be a couple sections, you know.
Yeah, do they still do that club and organization kind of late start or release time? Do they do that?
It's still an option in our schedule. I would have to check with Brian to see how frequently we're doing that and when we see those. He sees those already coming up. But I also think based on the information we already have, this is something that's both important and urgent. And I think we should make space for that conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could have the advisor. I'm not sure what that aids in the students' safety feeling. I know when we had the Justice League come in by themselves, as a fully engaged group, they were active, they were happy to be there, they contributed wonderfully. I think, you know, they felt empowered. And so, I mean, we can have advisors there, but I don't think students need it. But
I guess I'm not picturing where we meet the students.
I think you brought up an important wording about trying to change the culture. We're trying to change the culture. We know there's a problem. It was amazing at the end of what had gone on the past year while working towards this audit, how the students got emboldened and came out on their own to tell us what they felt and what they were seeing. We can't change the culture using the same methods and the same structures we've been using ever since I've been on the board and probably long before I was ever on the board. Structured board committees without students being equal parts of the committee, without them being able to help set the agenda and drive it, isn't going to change the culture for the students. We've done structured board committees, doing the same thing and then saying, administration, bring us their input and bring us their data. That's not going to work. We're going to get the same thing we've always gotten. As Tim said, we've got to engage with them. There was a way that they were seeing us engaging with them, and we're now cutting it off and turning it off and saying we're going to go back to our old structure. That's not going to change the culture. We've got to be bolder than that. And you know what? Yeah, it's messy, the concept of letting, we talked about having a student member on the board, non-voting. We dropped it. We set up this committee and put students on it, and they started to come out and speak, and we now dropped it. We need to let it be messy, and yeah, some people aren't gonna like what comes out of that committee, but guess what? Some people aren't gonna like what comes out of it. It's the nature of a large society. But we're not going to get those students to feel safe and better and be more open engaging by going backwards. And I feel right now, we're talking about going backwards. I'd rather have a messy committee that sometimes doesn't come up with super clean answers for us, but comes up with honest experiences and tells us what they are. And that's what that is. Structured listening sessions aren't going to do that. Us having structured committee members, board committees aren't going to do it because they've never done it in the past. So I know I'm going to be voting somehow to try to empower them and let them be part of the process and help set the process. That's how we're going to get them to be the most open as possible.
But Dave, if we, I think that's kind of what we're saying. We want to go to the students to engage them and make them part of the process.
I say let them be part of the process, not us go to them and then walk away and expect them to be more open somehow down the road. I don't think that worked. We did the Justice League thing, and then we dropped it for how long? And really, where did it go? This is the farthest I've seen the students engage with us ever. And we're backing off from it.
But on the current ad hoc committee, you had 2 students?
Yeah,
Three students?
but that's the incredible part. You had 2 students, but when you had your listening session, how many of them showed up to defend and say, don't stop this? And they did it on their own. And now we stop it. It seemed exactly the opposite of what they were asking us to do.
Dave, I don't see this committee as being a sounding board to the students.
Too bad.
I see something internal in the buildings that's where students are able to go. It's
They've
their
always had
place, it's their area. We have to create a comfortable area there. And if there aren't resolutions to it, then it goes to the board. But the board's role is not to be advocating with weekly, monthly responses to behavior needs or whatever it is. That's the job of our administration or whoever they design to make it happen. We create policy, control the budget. That's our job. And so I think if we're going to have a place where students get trust, have trust, they're never going to get it if the board's the place you got to come to.
No, it's
So they're
not
coming to
about-
us because they don't trust.
It's a difference between climate versus incident, individual incident. You have individual incidents, you're right. They need the counselor, the principal, the whoever to be able to go there. We create the climate for them to know that if there is an incident and they start having a problem, they know that the school district as a whole supports it.
Right.
Not that they bring, okay, I had a kid pick on me on the bus and I want you to solve it. They're not coming here for that. But what they want to hear is that the climate of the school district says, if something like that happens, the school district is going to do something about it. Right now, they don't feel that climate. That's what we heard from them. Now, if we don't give them, it's not about individual case sounding boards. It's about saying, you know what? We were seeing a lot of kids marching through the school, chanting, build that wall. What does the school think about it? It's not about them reporting each individual kid. It's about us coming out and saying, you know what? That was horrible. We need to make sure that that doesn't happen again. And we support that. We didn't do that. We didn't do that back then. And we're not going to do it with this type of a structure.
I don't see that as a connected point at all. I see this committee coming up with specific policy changes, practices, and moving those to the board for approval based on what you hear from this process. I think it's doable under either format.
I think the students saw it as a possible culture change and saw it as a way for them to talk about culture and climate. And I think we should let them keep doing it. I don't think this structure, you're right. The way you're talking about it now is setting up to be very specific about policy and specific things like that. And you know what? That's not going to affect the students in school. Overall, it's not going to see how they view the school isn't going to change. Because as Jack said, most of these things involve other committees that have existed forever. Nothing changes. They're seeing issues. They came and said that they wanted to talk about climate. I think we need to give them that structure to do it.
And I think
So-
one of the things that we can do in these listening sessions is talk about, the first one would be climate. What can you do, to support climate?
What
So
do
that
they
we-
need?
And as I indicated, it's, what's working, what's not working, what needs to be improved. And, get those ideas. So, I don't think we're shutting down any ideas. We're not shutting down conversations. And it doesn't mean that these people can't talk.
Yeah.
Is the community engagement idea to get an idea of what the people affected have to say, or is this just a time for everyone to come and give their opinions of how they think that people should be feeling and not feeling? I'm not clear on that. Are we welcoming just people who are affected to come and let you know how they're affected? Or is it whoever wants to come and give an opinion on how you think people should be feeling, come and let us know? Okay, thank you.
Well, I think the challenge is that we've got to have an open dialogue. And, if we're saying that we're not listening to anybody else, and this is this is what I feel.
So this is what I'm experiencing. There's a difference. People are
Or
coming
this
to
is
say
my-
they're experiencing, or are we welcoming people coming with opinions? There's a big difference. And I just want to make sure that we're not wasting time listening to people's opinions so that we can't hear the people's experiences.
I think everybody's got to be heard.
So you would like opinions and you'd like to drag this on really long.
Well,
I just wanted to comment, if we're able to comment from the gallery, that if we're talking about like fundamental culture change, that does affect everybody. It affects the whole student population, it affects the whole community, and engaging the whole community and all students is the way to go. I mean, only allowing or valuing certain groups' experiences with whatever they are is a divisive way to separate. It's not inclusive.
It just makes you feel left out because you're not experiencing it.
No, I'm not arguing with you personally. I'm talking about how a fundamental change of a community affects everyone. That's what I'm saying.
I think it's getting out of hand a little bit here.
Well, it is, it's a different type of meeting where we're trying to formulate and, we want to include ideas. So I know, I get it. Not sure where we're going from here.
Well, I think the next step is really to start formulating these listening sessions.
That's not our job, I don't think.
I think the first question, in my mind, as I'm listening here, I think there's a few different things. I think one, if we're kind of going to the role of kind of like these listening sessions, engagement sessions. It's not about the session, it's about the questions and the dialogue. That's what we want out of that. I mean, that's the most important piece. We can bring people together and have a listening session. We have listening sessions at every board meeting that last an hour. And hear everybody's perspective. I think we have to find a venue, at least in my mind, if that's the route we're going, that it's more of a discussion around very specific, but you talked about like the 3 questions. We
Yeah,
have to
and
define-
it's gotta be, it's not a listening session, it's a discussion
Right.
/ listening session.
It's
So that we
it's
can
through
have a dialogue.
that you're hearing, and then from there you're coming. If we're looking at ways to engage with the kids, I agree, we need to go to them. I think we need to talk to them. But I think we also need to then have a conversation with them about how do we best engage with them. Because I agree, if it's kind of a one row piece, I mean, what we learned when we brought like the Justice League in and some of the other groups, we learned it was greatly empowering to them. There were changes that came out of it. It was also extremely taxing on them because they felt like they spoke for an entire student population. So it was a very stressful environment for them, very prideful moment for them to be able to express that. But I think we have to ask them, how do we best engage with you on a continual basis as opposed to us just being here for 30 minutes during the contact time? So I think that's part of what we then need to figure out what that looks like. And that can be, it might land be something within the building. It might be something that we have, something that comes back administratively, board, staff. I mean, there's a lot of ways, but if we're gonna be thinking about how do we best engage with kids, well, then let's ask the kids how we best engage with them and what's meaningful to them. And that's a convert that can happen in a lot of different venues. But I also realize, and that's the piece that I've learned through the dialogue with kids is when you go to a group of students that are in one of the clubs, etc., you are going to hear voices, but it's also it's any student that's standing up and talking with us. To rely on that every time for how we kind of learn it. I mean, that's a piece that we've got to figure out how we do that. Because I also don't like the idea of putting our kids into something that maybe they're not all wanting to be there. But I think it's an important discussion. So it's a fragile piece. I just want to be careful of and trying to advocate for how we work with those.
Well, I think what we do is we leave that to administration to say this is how we're going to set up the student session, student contact.
And I think we have to work with our advisors to know the kids best and what's going to work best with them for how we're going to actually do that.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be open to what does that continual dialogue look like moving forward. I think that's a piece. I mean, but when I look at some of the things, and I keep going back to the DEI report, because I think the purpose that we received it for and what we asked for was to help us then guide kind of what our next steps were and what some of our actionable pieces are. And I think it was to your point, we just don't want to keep dragging the conversation out. We want to see what are we actually doing moving forward. And I think that's part of what we have to determine too, is are there things, if there's things that we feel are important, but you feel like you want more input on, then that's got to be part of what we're doing with some of the engagement stuff so it can start percolating forward. If there's also a piece that I think that the board of this committee needs to kind of go through them and say, these are ones that jump out to us that are ones that we can see easily and more easily. And you brought up the one about like facilities. I mean, that one fits in, that doesn't need a listening session. Huh? I mean, that's a matter of we
Give it
bring
to
it
the,
forward and we can
facilities
put it as part of our process. Are there others that's well similarly that we can address? I agree with Tim's point. The biggest piece that you can't parcel out to a committee is a better understanding of kind of the kids' experiences, because that's really what this is all about. It's about trying to improve that for all of our students. So, all of that, I think going back to kind of your question, Joe, it's not only about the engagement, it's about the questions. And I think that's the piece you have to be very diligent about to make it meaningful. And some of those questions may need to come back to what we got out of our audit to determine what do we actually want to learn and what are we trying to figure out. The second piece ties into what Tim is talking about, which is how do you get some of the voices from our student experiences that then we can articulate how does that frame and how does that mesh with some of these pieces. So I do think it's I don't have a specific schematic in my mind of what this looks like, but I can it starts to take shape if you're looking at focus groups or some level of a focus group type of a piece with specific questions. The key is the question.
So I guess as we move forward, let's focus on the questions. Let's identify in this report what we can parse out to curriculum and facilities and so forth. I think Mark had some good structure there as to the different focus areas.
But one thing I was wondering too, because there was questions, those on the committee and those not on the committee, about curriculum changes that have taken place or haven't taken place. About PD that's being done in the terms of equity and inclusion. Could you provide kind of an outline? I do think sometimes that's the thing, doesn't get to the public. It comes to our committee, it goes to the board, is passed. But, in light of some of the more highlight topics on our agenda, I think sometimes that gets lost in the communication as to how many things we are doing. I mean, I guess I was surprised from the DEI, how many teachers, and it wasn't specified that way, but it's kind of, I took it because they're a large membership, the committee, that suggested, I think, that we aren't doing enough with curriculum or PD. And from being on the board into my second term, I think we've done a lot in the last 4 years. But so I think getting that to the committee first of all, and then to the public, so they understand some of the things we're doing. That would take some of the burden off of the committee for we got that information. We just need to provide it.
And based on kind of your earlier request in this area, Mark, you're going to get something, maybe a down payment, maybe exactly what you're looking for, we'll see, at the November 18th curriculum committee meeting, which then, we always get feedback from you at the committee level of, is this meeting the target? Do we need to, focus more? Do we need to expand? And then it could potentially come into the December full board meeting.
Even with the reporting of data, I mean, you showed me so many things that answer questions that the committee was concerned about. You have such a multiplicity of different data and how to use it. And I do know you come to the board and share a lot of that on a regular basis. And we joke about it being glazed over moments, because data is data and it's not exciting, but it's telling our story. And I appreciate that you have that. So I think any of those things that we can clarify are currently being done, and yet we can find out from our engagement with the administrators what they feel they don't have, or what we could do better in terms of data collecting, or what kinds of data they could use better.
I think, and again, time is important, but so are these issues. I mean, regular progress monitoring, I think, is important. And, we gather information on a lot of things, but on topics of high priority, we can't bring all the information back all the time because the board needs to focus on other work. But I do think the progress, I think, some of these achievement gap areas, I think some, and certainly this really critical climate piece is the kind of area where I think periodic reports and, and I think talking particularly with the climate piece, engaging with our students, what would success look like? And I don't think we can just take it for granted as adults that we know what that looks like. I think we really do want to talk with our kids and make sure we understand from the student perspective, what they would like to see, and that can help kind of guide our progress monitoring. I mean, Mandy and I have been in the business a long time. Some of you are retired. I mean, everybody's a parent or retired educator, but we're not the kids that are sitting in our schools today. And I do think we need to get their input on what the goal would look like. And that would help guide kind of the strategies and the progress monitoring.
So, Tim, what is a good monitoring? Is it 6 months? Is it once a year? What, when you bring that data back? To say, hey, this is working, or this isn't.
So what would the measurables look like? I think, that's where we need to talk to the students, I have ideas, but I think my ideas are really incomplete until we've had some co-design work with our students. And I think in terms of how frequently you want it as a board, I would say that depends a little bit on what the goal is and a little bit, what time you feel is good to really bring sustained attention. If it comes in too frequently, you're going to just have pressure from other needs and maybe not go deeper in it. But if it comes around once a year, that's probably too seldom to have good feedback from you as the governing board. That didn't really answer your question, Jack, but I mean,
No, I think
it's partly based on, where the kids are at and where you're at as a board.
Yeah, maybe half, middle of the year, end of the year type. But you're right, we have to understand what the goals are and then develop the strategy along those goals.
Okay, so do we want to define X number of goals in the areas before we identify the committee makeup, or do we want to do the committee makeup at this point? I think we have to have both done before the committee meets.
Here's a thought. I mean, just because right now we're talking a lot about structure of the committee. But I think part of having the committee is then figuring out what are we doing. So what's going through my mind is the first thing we have to look at are two things going back to the audit report. One is, I know what Tim was talking about, and I think Mark, you were, what within the audit is already in place, it's already in progress. It's where is it being housed, or who's responsible for it, and what's the timeline for it continuing. So there are some of these things that are in progress. I think there's also then identifying areas within the audit that need the attention of, because these are actionable things. I mean, if you're looking at things like facilities, you're looking at things like practices within HR, et cetera, you're looking at disciplinary policy pieces. Where do they fall within our current structure? Because that's where the work's going to actually happen that's actionable. So where might they fall within those committee structures? Now, from there, the thing that the committee is going to want to know is all of these pieces have some issue of you need to get some additional data and learning behind them. And there's things on policy that you just don't write the policy and everybody understands exactly what that looks like. That's complex. So there's pieces that we may need to identify that are policy related, and maybe that's a piece that you also figure out if you want to look at this focus group piece, that you dial down on what some of those pieces are. The third piece then is how do you get to student experiences? Because I think that's the piece we can do that with our high school students. But I think somebody brought up that making sure we don't forget about our elementary students, and the voice of our elementary students is our parents. So we've got to hear from parents of what the experience is of our kids at the elementary. So there is value to that piece. Now, how this fits within this committee, a different committee, other committee, that I don't have. But this is the work regardless of where it falls within that committee structure. But I think you have to look at and respect the work of the audit piece. What's already moving forward so we can document that? Where does it fit within our current structure so we can start moving some of those things? use some of the focus groups potentially to vet some of those pieces out more specifically so that they can guide that work within those committees or within the board. And also have a driving question at each of these. It's really about, tell me about your kids' experiences in school. Specifically, we can start to narrow some of this down. We can hit some of our groups at the high school where that can be a much more specific. And my experience talking to the kids at the high school is they also represent their siblings, et cetera, across the district. So you get not only from the parents, you often get it from the high school. You can
So
see
why
some
don't
of
we take
those.
10 minutes? I don't know if it's going to take longer. To look at what are some actionable things we can just recommend for the full board after, we meet with them. Because initially we were pretty much told we're going to select a committee and a charter. But if we've seen actual things from the audit, for example, the hiring practices, we could send that to HR and have them follow through on that and come back with, in a timely way, what we are and what we aren't doing. But the same thing with the curriculum issue. So those are, we mentioned that. We mentioned the better communication for students' safety and inclusion. Those are direct responses to this committee report, and the subcommittee for the DEI, whatever it looks like, isn't going to have to deal with those things until they get the report. They get, they find out from HR, this is what we have, this is what we recommend. The curriculum things the same way. And in the meantime, we're acting on immediate ways to help students better report situations that are causing them the discomfort or worse. And then at that point, do you want us to give specific things for the committee to do? We focus on those 4 areas, and list 1 or 2 things we're looking for, and then we do the committee. I don't think we can leave without doing that. Unless we're gonna have to have another meeting very quickly, and it'd be nice to get this to the board and running soon. We have 2 weeks before the board meets, 1 week.
1 week,
1
1 week before they meet, but some of the things that you mentioned, Mark, I don't know if we have to pull them up. I mean, I think that Randy can probably, and I don't want to burden you, Randy, but I mean, I think that there's some items in here that, he would have the best.
And if it's the December meeting, it's the December meeting, just.
Well, we just report where we're at.
Right.
That's all I mean.
And we can recommend that these things are actionable and need to be done to get to understand better what we are or aren't doing based upon.
So
all
what I hear is our first kind of charge for our action is to have these focus groups, beginning with the student. Is that correct?
Or they can begin anywhere.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be, but I think to your point, we've got to figure out when we can do it. And if it takes more than 30 minutes, is there a way we could do it right after school for a period of time?
And do we want to set up a time where all of us are available? I know your availability during the day is much less, Jack. I know that, Mark, do we?
Yeah, I think, I think we all bring in different perspectives, right? And we hear different things. So it would be good if we can all be.
It would be good. I just didn't know how available you are with your days.
We just have to figure that out, as to when it's going to be.
I guess what, and it goes back to Mark's question. We have a meeting with the full board, the board was, but we have the full board meeting on next Monday. What do we want to bring there? I mean, I think what I'm hearing is that you want to start off with the focus group with the kids. Learn more about some of the experiences and kind of. flush
Do
through.
we have time to announce the committee meeting if we're gonna have it Thursday or Friday?
If we were gonna have another meeting this Thursday.
Well, Jack's suggesting if we can't get this done. I prefer to stay here till we're done with it, but
Well, I think what we're doing right now is coming up with what are we bringing to the board?
What are we bringing?
You know, the board is, you know, and I think we're bringing the listening sessions, you know, the 4 different or 5 different, you know, whatever it turns out to be.
well, we aren't. That would be the committee doing it. We're done after we do this task.
We're not done.
Aren't we?
No,
Oh, no.
this
This is our
what we're
standing
recommending.
committee,
What
Whereas-
we're recommending is a standing committee
a standing committee, and this is
Okay.
just,
of the board.
Okay, all right, so
so,
I misunderstood. So once we figure this out, then our job, we are the DEI committee, standing committee.
correct.
Okay. I guess I got confused because at the last meeting, we were saying, what's it gonna look like? And thank you.
And I think we just report where we are at the end of this meeting. You know, what we feel is, you know, and that's, we just bring it back to the full board, and it's the full board then.
Okay, so
Helps
do we
us.
want to talk about the membership tonight or not?
I thought we were pausing on the membership until we begin some of these listening sessions.
Okay,
Do you want some level of review? Going back to the audit piece, because there's pieces within there.
Exactly.
Do we want, I mean, I think, I don't want to lose that word. Is do we want to go back and have at least some level of analysis and kind of volunteering you and I to do that?
Yeah, to go through that and.
That you
No,
and
I
I could
think,
at least go through and vet through and
Yeah,
say
Randy,
where.
I think where we are, you know, what we're gonna be reporting back to the board is we're the committee at this point. Going into the listening sessions, we're charging you to go through the audit, and then we come back at our next meeting is review the audit. Does that make sense?
We could. Yeah, I mean, I think the reviewing of the audit is, that's what I was trying to get a sense is that you want that for us to try to do for Monday's meeting.
No.
I don't think you need it
No,
for
you-
Monday's meeting.
that's not fair.
That's not, but I think that is something we should do.
And come to us as soon as possible. That's practical.
So what you
Well, and
want,
we set up another
Yeah.
committee meeting,
That's what we
probably
talked
before
about.
the listening session.
so what you'd like for Monday, then, and I'm just looking at what to put in into our agenda pieces. Is just the identification of proposed groups that we would have dialogue with. Identify potentially some of the driving questions that might help with that. Is that something they're asking us to try to put? That should be a conversation of the board. I mean, that's the next meeting piece. That's the most important part here. And I guess that's what I'm not sure what questions you actually want to dive into, other than wanting the student experiences, which I think has to be one of the questions we ask of any of our groups, is trying to get a better sense of those things.
But Randy, to those questions, they're for each one of the groups. Same questions we give to every group, let everybody talk.
But that should be something I think we
Yep.
do at this committee. That's, we don't have to charge that to Randy.
No, I think.
I think
our
that
next-
if you
our-
guys can go through that audit and
Figure out what.
peel out,
My thought is looking at what are the things that are already in process and kind of give an update on what those are. And then second, additionally, take a look at the items that are in there and identify where we have existing places for that work to take place so it can keep moving forward. And that might be helpful, at least to respect this work and put it into a place where it continues. to move. And then if we have additional engagement pieces, we identify what those driving questions are. One of them being about student experience.
So an agenda for our next meeting is that's when you will bring this work to this committee. You don't have to do that before Monday. You bring that back to this committee as you analyze this and try to, parcel it out into appropriate administrative or other committees. But then I think as we come back to this table, we try to bring those questions.
Yes.
And then we collaborate on each of our ideas on those questions that we want to ask at those listening sessions.
So what would be helpful for focusing them on the good work that needs to be done, whether we have these 3 topics from the audit report, or there might have been a 4th that I missed, to come up with 2 items that deal with structural issues that the administration wouldn't be handling at this point, that needs more attention or something. I heard curriculum and I heard
Yeah, I think you'll see that in our review.
Yeah,
of the
right,
audit.
yeah,
You'll be able to see
And the
kind
HR
of
thing.
what's relevant and what's not.
Students were concerned about their safety issues, belonging. And then in terms of community communications and how we do or don't hear from them, how we connect or don't reconnect. So whatever it is, I think if you want to agree on those 3, you want a 4th topic. But I think if we each come with 2 items under each, it'll provide sufficient work to occupy us for some time. And then we have the agenda, and at the next meeting, I think we also just then need to define our leadership, or not our leadership, but committee, how it's gonna, what are we gonna do? Are we keeping it within a standing committee operation with just 3 board members, or are we opening it up to a greater idea like Dave mentioned, or more limited, but still representative?
And I think, and to me, the composition of the committee obviously is, is a board decision. I mean, the 2 observations I would make is you're going to want to have that composition in play. I mean, we can plan listening and engagement, but you're going to want to have all of the ears that you're going to have together before we actually move into that engagement process. So just from a timing piece, and then, thinking about size and compositions, of committees, the 90s are kind of coming back, flannels kind of coming back. Mark and Joan, you may remember this. I don't know if you like this, or I don't know if this is good vibes or bad vibes, but I mean, the Visions Committee was an example of a mixed committee that was a kind of medium size. Just a thought.
Jeans are still in.
Jeans never go up.
Okay. All right. So do we have a
Motion
date?
to adjourn? Or
I think we have a plan.
Do we have a date for our next meeting for the next?
No, we don't. Do we want to set that now?
Before Thanksgiving, I would suggest the week of the 15th.
For the what?
15th.
That's what I was thinking.
About the 16th.
Looks good to me.
It's Tuesday.
no, I've got
Does Monday work for Jackson Monday, Aaron?
Does Monday work for you guys? I know there's an HR committee,
No, I think it's
That's-
fantastic.
that's in the AM.
We have an HR that morning.
Can we do 5:30 again on 14th?
On the 15th, 14th is Sunday.
We'll do 15th.
15th, we don't have openings.
What's that?
So what do you propose?
Monday, the 15th.
At 5 o'clock?
5:30.
Yeah, we can do that.
Does that work?
I can do that.
Okay. Motion to adjourn.
Motion second, all in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you.